Good morning. Welcome to the Ethical Culture Society of Westchester's Sunday platform meeting. My name is Bart Worden. I am the clergy leader for the Ethical Society, and I'll be your presider today. The Ethical Society is a community of people who aim to make a world where compassion and equity are the driving forces for realizing the unique worth and dignity of each person. We seek a world where fear and anger are met with love and respect, and where our differences enhance rather than diminish our connection with the rich diversity of life. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory and homelands of the Lenape people. We also acknowledge the devastating impact upon the lives of the people who were living in the area by the settlers who arrived after 1492. Through spreading disease, through bloodshed, and by making and breaking of treaties, Indigenous peoples were killed or displaced from ancestral lands. We acknowledge, too, that we have not been good stewards of the land, and we pledge to do better. May the example the Lenape people provided of caring for the land for so many generations be a beacon of hope to lead us toward respectful and worthy action, to honor those who have come before, energize those who now live, and safeguard the future for those who will follow. Now, we've been having Sunday platform meetings that are both in-person and hybrid, but we've needed to suspend the in-person part. So instead, we'll be meeting via Zoom only today. So I'm very glad you all found the link and got in here. We're assuming that at this point, you know how to use the Zoom platform to mute and unmute yourself and raise your hand electronically. Does anyone, though, have a question about that? If so, you can wave your hand and we'll recognize you. Otherwise, we will move along. Yeah, each Sunday we like to have some time for thoughtful reflection and conversation about a meaningful topic. I'll pose a question for you to consider, and then our host will randomly assign everyone to virtual breakout rooms in pairs or groups of 3-ish. Anyway, it's a little bit of an art more than a science. Once you are gathered in the breakout rooms, take turns responding to the question I'll be posing in a moment. And Matt, you can be making those rooms right now if you don't mind. Focus on listening to each other sharing in the 4 to 5 minute session. And after that, we'll come back together, and those who would like to share will have an opportunity to do so. Today, our speaker will be talking about humanist efforts to connect with college students. So today's question: what stands out for you about your life when you were between the ages of 18 and 22? Brooklyn, our pianist, will be offering a musical offering for us right now. Thank you.
Here we go.
Thank you, Brooklyn. I do love hearing your music on our Sunday morning, so thanks again. Our guest today is Dr. Ann Klaeysen, who retired as clergy leader of the New York Society for Ethical Culture 2 years ago, but continues to serve the campuses of Columbia University and New York University as chaplain. Dr. Klaeysen is also co-chair of the Encampment for Citizenship. A little known fact, the Encampment for Citizenship, which is a youth-oriented program in the summer, was once housed at our Ethical Society in White Plains. And we know about this because we were doing some renovations and found the showers that they had installed for that purpose. Anyway, so she's co-chair for the Encampment for Citizenship and serves on the board of Ethical Culture Fieldston Schools. She holds a doctor of try this once more. She holds a Doctor of Ministry degree from Hebrew Union College and master's degrees in German from SUNY Albany and Business Administration from NYU. She's a member of the Brooklyn Society for Ethical Culture, where she was married and raised her 2 children. Ann's topic today is humanism on campus. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to being with you in person again. I hope in the not too distant future. So good morning and to all of you. I always like to begin and end with a poem. So I chose this one by humanist Kurt Vonnegut, and he wrote this back in April of 2007. It's called Worship. I don't know about you, but I practice a disorganized religion. I belong to an unholy disorder. We call ourselves Our Lady of Perpetual Astonishment. You may have seen us praying for love on sidewalks outside the better eating establishments in all kinds of weather. Blow us a kiss upon arriving or departing, and we will climax simultaneously. It can be quite a scene, especially if it's raining cats and dogs. Well, I love Kurt Vonnegut, as I'm sure many of you do, and he was given a humanist award by the American Humanist Association some years ago. And as you know, we have both secular and religious humanist organizations, and both are represented on various campuses across the country. So what I'd like to talk with you about today is the need for more humanist chaplaincies on college and university campuses. There are far too few of us. And if you're familiar with the data coming out of the Pew Forum, you know that the number of people identifying as nuns, and I spell that N-O-N-E-S, and identify with the acronym SBNR, which stands for spiritual but not religious, is growing. It's growing by leaps and bounds. And it's fascinating because it was sort of first identified within the age cohort of millennials, but it's also sort of peaked then, but it's growing, and not only in that age cohort and younger ones, but also in ones in my age cohort as well. In fact, NYU, one of the campuses I serve, collects the data from incoming freshmen. Columbia, where I also serve, does not do that, unfortunately. I wish they did. And the gathering of the information is how incoming freshmen identify themselves religiously or spiritually. And there, the number of so-called unaffiliated is over 20%. So clearly there is a need for me on that campus, and there's a need for chaplains on other campuses as well, where I imagine the numbers are not that different. And unless, of course, it is a religious campus, you know, like Notre Dame, for example. So what I'm going to do this morning is to tell you about the very first university humanist chaplain. His name was Tom Ferrick, and he served at Harvard. And also tell you some more about the latest humanist chaplain, Vanessa Gomez-Brake. And actually, she is an associate dean of religious life at the University of Southern California, which is a great accomplishment for us humanists, because she's not just a humanist chaplain, she's actually an associate dean of religious life at this campus. So let me start off with Tom Ferrick. And Bart, you may know him. He died back in 2013. So some of our colleagues did get to meet him. He was eulogized in the Boston Globe, a publication that often wrote about Tom, because he's an interesting character, not least because he was the first university humanist chaplain. The Boston Globe says about Tom, en route from his place at the pulpit as a Roman Catholic parish priest to his tiny basement office in Memorial Church as Harvard University's first humanist chaplain, Tom Ferrick set aside beliefs that had provided sustenance after his parents died when he was a child. Here's what Tom told the Globe back in 1973. He said, "One doesn't lose faith overnight in the religion that supported him and inspired him through all his mature years. It erodes, I think, by virtue of the keen observation of life and the judgment that no earthly authority can assume so wide a competence as the Catholic Church did." A personal note here, my cousin, who's also a Catholic priest, Father Ed Dillon, knew Tom. They were fellow seminarians. In fact, they spent some time in Rome together. And Ed, having followed Tom's transformed vocation, was also familiar with ethical culture. So I turned to my cousin Ed to have him help me explain to my Irish Catholic mother all about ethical culture, since I was married to the Brooklyn Society 40 years ago. So just one of those small world connections that Ed knew Tom very well. Tom Ferrick was slight of frame, and he was so thoughtful and calm that some who met him in his later years couldn't imagine him raising his voice in the protests that he attended against the Vietnam War in the 1960s. But his words always packed a philosophical wallop. Back in 1990, he told the Globe, "The notion that we all stand in need of redemption is anti-humanist. The fact that ordinary human beings are capable of love, compassion, and sacrifice, independent of theology, is proof that we can indeed be good without a God." He left the Catholic priesthood in 1969, and he was leader of the Ethical Society in Boston. And then he became a humanist chaplain at Harvard. He lived on an income so modest that it might as well have been a vow of poverty. But one day, John Loeb, who was a wealthy Harvard alumnus, read an article about Tom in the Harvard Gazette and invited him to lunch. They soon became friends. And when Loeb and his wife donated tens of millions of dollars to the university in the early 1990s, Loeb used $800,000 of that to endow the humanist chaplaincy. So not only was Tom the first humanist chaplain in a university, he also had the money for it, $800,000 to seed that first humanist chaplaincy at Harvard. And Loeb told the New York Times in 1995, "I've sort of been a humanist all my life." And he said, "More crimes are being committed in the name of God every day. The humanistic approach of deeds, not creeds, appeals to me." So thank goodness that he liked Tom and he was able to endow that chaplaincy at Harvard. Leaving religion behind also meant setting aside thoughts of an afterlife, which Tom felt made life more precious. Every day of it is more precious. And he told the Harvard Crimson back in 1978, "If your existence ends when you die, you will treasure life more, and you will try harder to do right and fight for good. You regard this world as something holy." So as you can imagine, the Harvard Crimson also eulogized Tom when he died in 2013 and pointed out that he had grown up as an orphan with his sister Dorothy and spent his early life as an active member of the church. He went to Holy Cross College and graduated in 1951 and went on to become a priest and actually started his life as a chaplain, as a Catholic chaplain at Dartmouth College. Tom was also an openly gay man. And of course, the Catholic Church's position on that, as well as many other social issues, probably helped to push him out of the Catholic Church, as it did many of us. When Tom Ferrick came to Harvard as a chaplain, he did not allow his qualms with the religious life to adversely affect his work and his mission in promoting that open religious and humanist discussion at Harvard. Rather, he really encouraged that religious diversity at the university, which had previously only recognized chaplaincies for the Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic faiths. So he really was, he broke new ground there. He was also Jesuit trained, and he cheerfully admitted to the Harvard Magazine interview that he and the other board members didn't always manage a united viewpoint. As Tom pointed out, the wonderful thing is that when the united ministry at Harvard meets and begins to debate different things, say gay rights, we always use the logic and rationality of naturalism. When any chaplain's point of view fails to reach consensus, he or she has to withdraw that issue and settle for gains in other places. And what an experience it is to test the limits of tolerance and to learn respect for others' points of view. It's a living example of what's possible. Tom liked to tell a story that summed up his convictions about the harmonizing virtues of humanism while acting as his modest yardstick for success. And it involved going back to John Loeb, who endowed the chaplaincy at Harvard. Not only did John Loeb graduate from Harvard, class of 1924, but also Corliss Lamont. And some of you may recognize his name because he was a socialist, social and political activist who was the founding member in 1941 of the American Humanist Association and one of Tom Ferrick's early supporters at Harvard. Well, in 1993, I told you already that John Loeb read about Tom Ferrick being at Harvard, and he also got together with Corliss Lamont. So here are these two elderly gentlemen, one who had a great deal of money, one not so much, but they were both in the class of 1924 at Harvard, and really helped to support Loeb financially and Corliss Lamont philosophically that first university chaplaincy. Of course, many of you are familiar with Greg Epstein, who took over for Tom at Harvard in 2005 and is now also at MIT. And he made a big splash recently because he was voted as the head university chaplain at Harvard, a position that Tom had also held. But since social media made more of it today than they made of it when Tom was, there was some controversy around that. At any rate, thank you, Greg, for writing a bestseller called Good Without God, What a Billion Non-Religious People Believe, which was a 2010 bestseller and brought several members to the New York Society who had read that book. So thank you, Greg, for that. So that's our history of the first humanist university chaplain, Tom Ferrick. And now to our more recent one, who's taken on more success as this associate dean. So Vanessa Gomez-Brake is the first humanist chaplain to serve in the capacity of a dean at any American university. And in her role, she works to support and promote university religious and spiritual life, very broadly conceived. And she oversees more than 90 student religious groups and 50 religious directors on campus. So she's in charge of all that. She oversees all of it. She also serves as an advisor to the University of Southern California Interfaith Council and the Secular Student Fellowship. Previously, she had worked at Stanford University's Office for Religious Life, where she led campus programming and worked closely with student-led religious groups. And at Stanford, she organized ceremonies, events, programs, worship services, at the historic Stanford Memorial Church, and CIRCLE, which stands for Center for Interreligious Community, Learning, and Experiences. Additionally, she played a supporting role at Windhover Contemplative Center and the campus-wide series, Contemplation by Design. So I met Vanessa because she was one of the students at the former Humanist Institute, now the Center for Education at the American Humanist Association. And she earned a Master of Divinity degree at Chicago Theological Seminary. And as I said, also was part of the former Humanist Institute and now Center for Education. And she's now on our advisory council of the Center for Education. Back in 2019, when the Parliament of the World's Religions was held in Toronto, Vanessa and I gave a workshop together about, what else? University chaplaincies. So it's just a delight to work together with her and have her paving the way for more chaplains to take leadership roles as deans and associate deans on university campuses. So as I mentioned earlier, there are very few of us. So here are the rest of us. Benjamin Bieber is an ordained humanistic rabbi, and he is the chaplain at American University in Washington, D.C. I mentioned that Greg Epstein is now not only at Harvard, but also at MIT. And he works with, of course, atheists, agnostics, and allies at Harvard and MIT. Barry Castle has been the humanist chaplain at Rutgers since May 2009. So as I think I mentioned earlier, both the AEU and the AHA have chaplains. So Barry has a chapter of the AHA at Rutgers, and he also was approved by the university's Religious Life Council at Rutgers. Stanford, John Figdor was the first humanist chaplain on the West Coast, and he served at Stanford. And at the University of Toronto, we also have a humanist chaplain, Mary Beattie, and she's part of the University of Toronto Humanist Chaplains, and she's part of the University of Toronto Secular, Ethical, and Humanist Students and Scholars. There has also been a chaplaincy at Tufts University for 8 years. And actually the most recent one at the University of Southern California is Ryan Bell. And some of you may remember having met him at a previous AEU assembly. He and my daughter, Emily Newman, did a workshop on the Secular Student Alliance. So he continues to work with the Secular Student Alliance, but he's now the humanist chaplain at USC. And for, I guess, after nearly 20 years in congregational pastoral ministry, Ryan left his church in 2013 and began to explore atheism and humanism. And he wrote about his experience in a blog called Year Without God. And that became quite an international phenomenon. And he was covered by CNN, BBC, NPR, and has continues that as a podcast. So when he left his faith behind, he became this writer. Ryan became a writer and speaker on many different topics, and is now, as I said, remains with the Secular Student Alliance and is the chaplain at USC. Yale chaplaincy was founded by Chris Stedman, who started at Harvard with Greg and then moved over to Yale. Chris is now working with David Breeden in Minneapolis, and Kathleen Green remains on the board of directors at Yale. So that's it, people. There aren't very many of us. I interned with Bo Meyerson back in 2000 when she was the university chaplain at Columbia. Actually, Columbia has an interesting nomenclature. There is only one university chaplain. Her name is Juanelle Davis. The rest of us are called religious life advisors. So I interned with Bo back in 2000. And then when I went to be leader at the Long Island Society in Garden City in 2001, a couple of years later, or actually a year later, I was able to join the Interfaith Center at Adelphi University, and I became the first humanist university chaplain at Adelphi. And that came about also because they had hired a professor in the theater department who was at Harvard. And so he knew Greg. And when he came to Adelphi, he said, where's the humanist chaplain? I don't see the humanist chaplain on your roster. And they said, we didn't know there was such a thing. And so because of him, Adelphi reached out to me. And my experience there, my initial experience, I think maybe typical for some of us, when the dean wanted to introduce me to the other chaplains at Adelphi, their question was, is she a religion-hating atheist? That was their main concern. So I convinced them that I was not, that I could play nicely with others who did believe in a God. And we had a wonderful time there. That was just a wonderful experience at Adelphi. And one of the things that made it wonderful for me was that you probably are familiar that there's still a tradition with incoming freshman classes that they all read the same book. And then they have some kind of a seminar that's part of their orientation. And at some universities, that's combined with, how to write an essay, how to read articles well and how to learn from them. And at Adelphi, they rotated teaching that class among the different departments, including the Interfaith Center. So I was able to lead a class at Adelphi and was able to introduce myself to more students there than I might otherwise have been able to do. And that's an important aspect of being a university chaplain, or at Columbia, religious life advisor. At the nomenclature at NYU has changed to spiritual life advisor. So I want to tell you a little bit about my experience so that you understand what goes on the campuses. And although each campus is unique, there are a lot of things that we have in common, and we get together virtually and sort of compare our notes. Every campus has a different requirement for who can be a chaplain or religious or spiritual life advisor, and they have different contracts, covenants, agreements that we sign to be able to be on the campus. In the case of both Columbia and NYU, I need to prove that I have been certified or ordained, in my case, certified by the AEU, and that I am sponsored by or represent a religious community. So in my case, even though I retired as congregational leader from the New York Society continues to sponsor me. That's something I would like to see change. I think that it's something that the American Ethical Union should do. That way it opens up, it makes it available to more people across the country. That is something that the American Humanist Association does. As I mentioned, there were, I think, about half of the current university chaplains are sponsored by the AHA. I am the only one who's certified by the AEU, who serves as a university chaplain. Often what's done is you're vetted, you go through a process. At Columbia, they also require that I have a certificate of insurance from the sponsoring organization, which I think is a very good idea, because even though I think all of my colleagues are well trained and do a good job, I think from a legal perspective and from one of responsibility, it's good to have a certificate of insurance so that you're bonded. We often are part of, we advise a student club. So one reason that I'd like us to get out there more, and why I was so happy to teach a class at Adelphi, is that in order to have a student club, here's the catch-22. As an adult, I cannot start a student club. Students must do that. And then I can advise that student club. But how would they know that I'm there and available to do that unless I promote myself? So it's kind of a catch-22. At NYU, where I mentioned they actually gather that data, they know that over 20% of their students are unaffiliated. So they know that they need me. And whether or not I have a club to advise, And at NYU, it's often been the Secular Student Alliance. At Columbia, there was a separate humanist club and also a mindfulness club. But at NYU, because they know they have a student body that will need me, I'm able to maintain a position there. Columbia, the current dean of religious life feels that way also, but they are a little more rigid in terms of you must be advising a student club. And given the pandemic and meeting virtually, it has been a real challenge to keep these clubs going. A generation on a university campus among undergraduates is about 4 years. So if the club officers have not built into their life, the life of the club, sustaining it by bringing in other people, then that club could die, and then you're starting all over again. So one thing that's been very helpful for me on both campuses is when they have reached out to the campus community, for example, on panel discussions, I'm the only humanist. So I'm always on the panel. So whether it's a panel that talks to the university campus about the diversity of religious and spiritual life, or whether in the case of Columbia Medical School, I'm on the panel to talk about medical ethics, I'm the go-to person. So that's the good news, whereas there are many Christian chaplains. Also, it's interesting the difference, the uniqueness between Columbia and NYU. Columbia tends to have fewer religious life advisors. There are not even a dozen of us, whereas at NYU, there are close to 70 of us. And each campus kind of prides itself on that, kind of the elitism of the Ivy League Columbia and the openness and expansiveness at NYU. So it's a very different feeling on both campuses, and I love them both. I love the students there. Let me tell you just a little bit about the students who come to me, and then I'd like to, open it up maybe at the end for some questions. Students come for different reasons. They find out about me either because they see me on a panel or they've seen the listing on the college campus. And part of it is for counseling, and particularly during COVID. I have done more counseling than I had in my previous years because, as you can well imagine, anxiety and stress of this isolation has gone through the roof. And we ended up this last semester on both campuses meeting virtually again. So I've been in touch with students in terms of anxiety. One thing that NYU does very well, better than Columbia, I believe, is being aware of that. They have had a wellness program called Radical Health. And I've been one of the facilitators. We've been doing it since the pandemic began and meeting on Zoom. And now it's required for incoming freshmen. And it teaches them about self-care, about wellness, self-care, starting and maintaining relationships, being in community. And we show some inspirational videos, we do breakout groups, and it has been an incredible experience for me as a facilitator, but also being able to reach out to students. So at the end of each one of those sessions, and there are weekly sessions for 4-week periods, I will leave it open and I'll say, look, I understand this is the end of the time for today's session. I will stay on if any of you would like to have a conversation. And invariably they do. And I'll have 1 or 2 people who will either talk with me at that time or make an appointment. So that's what I've been doing a lot during the COVID pandemic is counseling for anxiety, stress, being isolated. Another piece of it is curiosity. A humanist? What's that? Never heard of it before. So I'll have students contacting me out of curiosity. And then the third thing is what I call existential issues. I just had an exchange with an NYU student, and we'll be talking this week about just existential. Is there an unmovable mover? What about Pascal's wager? Is there life after death? And so that the presenting issue is kind of an existential one. And when I listened to him this week, we've been exchanging email. I'm going to be listening to what are the feelings underneath the existential questions? What might be going on? What can I help this student hear himself say? So that's a little bit about my experience. I've been doing this for over 20 years now, joyfully so. And I want to conclude with this. I urge the AEU to make this a priority. I urge you as members of the Westchester Society and the AEU to promote it and to support it. Right now, I'm the only university chaplain certified by the AEU, and I'm only able to do it because the New York Society endorses me and supports me in that. And thanks to Bo Meyerson, I actually have some money at Columbia, which I haven't had to use because we've been meeting virtually the last few semesters. The AHA, as I mentioned, is responsible for most of the other current university chaplains. They do endorse, but alas, the AHA does very little training. And I've called them to task for that, which I'm able to do since I'm on the Center for Education Advisory Council. And I make myself available for training. But it's not, unfortunately, it's very little is required of them, which is a problem. So that's it. I have a closing poem, and I'm open for questions, concerns, suggestions. My closing poem is by Anne Alexander Bingham. It's called "It Is Enough." And I like this poem so much because I think it really, so many poems sum up for me what humanism is. And at NYU this semester, we did a project. I'm co-chair of the Bridges Committee that has diversity. And we were asked to submit something for winter reflections out of scriptures. And of course, my scripture is poetry. So "It Is Enough" by Anne Alexander Bingham. To know that the atoms of my body will remain, to think of them rising through the roots of a great oak, to live in leaves, branches, twigs, perhaps to feed the crimson peony, the blue iris, the broccoli, or rest on water, freeze and thaw with the seasons. Some atoms might become a bit of fluff on the wing of a chickadee, to feel the breeze, know the support of air, and some might drift up and up into space, stardust, returning from whence it came. It is enough to know that as long as there is a universe, I'm a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, so much. Anne, we'd like to have a little bit of music between our discussion, our presentation and our conversations. So I'd like to ask Brooklyn to come on back.
All right, you got it. Okay.
Thank you so much, Brooklyn. Lovely, lovely, lovely. So now is our time to, we have an opportunity to reflect on today's presentation. So I invite you to share feelings and thoughts that have arisen in you this morning. So what did Anne's talk stir in you? And I'm going to remove the spotlight here so that we can see each other. So I want to switch to gallery view so you can see other folks here. So are there people that would like to raise your hand and share? Yes, Jeff. Just need to unmute though, please. Oh, one more time.
Okay. I do note that that the HCU is looking at affiliating with other humanist bodies. And I'm wondering if you see that as a positive thing. I'm very concerned about developing consensus for a world that's very polarized. And the more that we can project a humanist voice, the better we are without bringing all the baggage of organized religion. Do you see that as a positive effort?
I didn't hear, I didn't understand what you said at the beginning, Jeff. What was the question again?
I can fill in. So there has been some conversation about the possibility that the American Ethical Union would become part of the UUA or part of the AHA or some kind of arrangement of that sort. So that has been something that's been a topic of conversation.
Okay, well, it's probably been a topic of conversation for decades and generations. I don't know if it'll actually happen. Certainly many of us as individuals are members of both the AEU and the AHA. I think it's important that we maintain, I think we can always come together on some common ground and find a lot of common ground. But I think, personally, I think that there's a lot that makes us unique and distinctive. And I wouldn't want to lose that. But I think that I've also, my experience on these two campuses, well, three can counting Adelphi over the years, is that we can find a lot of common ground and not have to lose our identity. I'm certainly part of a collective, a community on those campuses, but I'm valued for my humanist voice, and I value others as well. And I think what's important, again, important to have a presence on these campuses is that for many, many people, their only experience of diversity may very well be on a university campus, and they're not there for that long. And so I know that was important for me as a student, and I think it's important for the students that I serve now. They probably come from families and communities that believe a certain way and behave in a certain way. And when they get their professional degree, they may go into a career. This period of time on a university campus may be their only experience of living with diversity. And so I think it's really important, not for us to proselytize necessarily, but I think that what we do, the chaplains, life advisors do on the purpose that we serve on those campuses is to show students how we get along and how we can form common ground and how that's possible. So I think that we can be part of coalitions and not lose our identity.
Thank you, Anne. Vaughn and Emil. Just unmute, please. There you go.
Good morning. Yeah, and my question sort of follows that about campuses. We have a junior in high school right now, and my my question is, as humanist parents, right? How or what resources could we or she use to look across the United States for campuses that, support SBNR students?
Well, as I mentioned, there are very few that currently have humanist chaplains or chaplaincies, very few. That does not mean that your child cannot start one, because every I shouldn't say every campus, most campuses will have some kind of interfaith center, and they want to be available to students, and they want to avail themselves of the students' needs. And this is an interesting change, because around the 1980s, it had been assumed that most university campuses, that the students were all secular, that there were no religious students, and if they were, they would lose their religion and become secular. But in the 1980s, Aston and Aston did a number of studies to show that that was not the case, that students actually did feel some sense of religiosity or spirituality, even the SBNR, spiritual but not religious, and that campuses were failing their students if they did not recognize that. So since then, most campuses will have some sort of interfaith center, office of religious life, and it will be staffed. Now, we chaplains are volunteers. I was fortunate that the New York Society included that as part of my contract. I mean, now I'm all volunteer, but there are paid staff in the offices. For example, NYU has a Center for Global Spiritual Life, and they have a paid director and paid staff and student interns. But the 70 life advisors there are all volunteer. So what I'm saying is that when you're checking out campuses, look to see if they have an interfaith center, if they have an office of spiritual religious life, and then ask if there is any humanist presence. And as I say when I'm tabling for NYU events, out in Washington Square, and students come up, I'll say, we represent any faith that you have, and if we don't, let us know and we'll start something. And I think most campuses are open to that. And I'm available if you want any advice. Arthur Dobrin got in touch with me last year about starting something at Hofstra. So we're available, to give any advice. My son went to the University of Rochester and started something there and invited me. He did fireside chats with different chaplains, and so he invited me to come and do something. So your child can always invite one of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. All right, other people want to share? Okay, well, I think we should move along then. So this is a time when you do have an opportunity to share milestones. Are there important things happening in people's lives that they would like to share? Any milestones today? Okay, well, let's move along then to announcements and contributions. So we do welcome financial contributions, which you can make at the link on this slide. There's also some folks have contributed to our box party, which is when we made a bunch of gift bags. If you missed your opportunity to do that, it's not too late. So feel free to follow the link to the form. I also wanted to note that Louise Jett is doing the 1619 Project listening series. We had the first session last Tuesday, and there's several sessions left. And so this is Tuesday evenings. It's on Zoom. And it's best if people listen to the New York Times 1619 Project podcast for that particular episode. It's episode 2 coming up. And it's a great experience. A lot of folks actually from the society did join last week, and I think it's really going to be great moving forward as well.
We are going, in light of Omicron stats, we are going to postpone and meet in February, not the 20th of January. So it'll be February 17th, and everybody will get a note regarding that.
All right, so same place, but different.
No, actually, we're going to move it to a place where we can sit very
Oh,
separately.
good. Oh, okay. Here. I appreciate that, Jim. Thank you very much for that. The book group is still meeting, and so they're doing a book by Joan Didion, Play It As It Lays, and they will be meeting next on January 24th at 3 p.m. via Zoom. So if you want to join that, please feel free. Michael, you have an announcement. Please unmute yourself.
And I don't know if you can hear me. Are you a potter? I'm looking at the teapot on your mantle, and it looks like it's something that you made. It's beautiful.
I wish I were that good, Michael. Everything on my mantel's from the Rochester Folk Art Guild, and that's a commune in the Finger Lakes area. So I grew up in the Finger Lakes area, a small village on the Erie Canal, and so they're not too far from me, and I love all their pottery.
The teapot's lovely.
A nice plug for non-virtual backgrounds. Any of the announcements? Okay, well, let's move along then to our thank yous and closings. So I do want to make a special thank you to Anne for coming out today for our presentation, and also to Brooklyn for her lovely music, and to Matthew for providing technical assistance. We do have closing words today from Command Kajori. Do not give them a candle to light the way. Teach them how to make a fire instead. That is the meaning of enlightenment. Thank you so much for joining us today. I do hope you have a wonderful week. We will keep this channel open for a while if you want to chat. And we do look forward to seeing you in the near future. So take care, everybody.
Thank you.